Hi, and welcome to week 7, Constructivism in Elementary Science Education. This week is really important because the course, the entire book we're using, the framework that we've been referring back and forth to, the Montana Common Core Standards, all of those are founded on the principle that we should be using constructivist-based teaching techniques in all of our teaching, including elementary science. This week you have one reading assignment, and that's just chapter 4 in your textbook, Constructivism in Elementary Science Education. You have a video to watch, and actually, I'm sorry, there's a typo on this slide. You have a video to watch, which is about, it's a teaching channel video where you're going to look for constructivist principles in an outdoor garden ecosystems class. And then the activity is that you'll go to this website and complete one of the tasks, and I'll talk more about that at the end of this video. So to start off with, what is constructivism? Constructivism says that individuals construct what they learn and understand. This is a unique perspective. As your book states, this means we can't think of knowledge as a commodity to be transferred. It needs to be cultivated and developed by each individual learner. This is really important when we think about what constructivism isn't. It isn't the teacher-centered lecture at the front of the classroom where the teacher is just delivering their knowledge to the student. The knowledge actually needs to be constructed by the student, and this means having experiences that allow that knowledge construction. It emphasizes the contribution of learners to their own learning. This is key because it requires us to acknowledge the role of the learner and be willing to change our classrooms to have the learner at the center. It also emphasizes the importance of social interaction in the development of skills and knowledge. We'll look in some depth at two different theorists, Piaget and Vygotsky. They're both constructivists. One of the differences between them is how they think about the role of social interaction. Their general beliefs about knowledge are that it's formed within, not imposed from the outside. This is key because it means we really need to understand students' prior knowledge and understand what knowledge they've already formed within them. It also is subjective and personal. What we know is true for us. It may not be true for others, but it's true for us. In order to change prior knowledge, we need to understand it fully and then provide experiences that can change that internal truth. That requires not only really knowing our students, but being responsive to them. And finally, it's situated in context. It's necessary for us to be aware of how and where things are learned and how and where they'll be used. Learning things out of context can mean that students aren't able to recall them later. Some major instructional implications of constructivism is an emphasis on integrated curriculum. It really helps students to make connections between their knowledge and construct it in meaningful ways for later use. There's an emphasis on multiple perspectives on material. This helps to relate students' prior knowledge and conceptions. And there's a lot of different ways to have that multiple perspectives. A lot of it does involve social learning opportunities where students are able to hear from their peers and from other people besides just their teacher. There's also an emphasis on learner-centered principles, and this speaks a lot to the need to adjust and adapt based on the learner. Instruction should definitely get learners actively involved in materials and social interaction, and should teach students how to be self-regulated, how to have an active role in their own learning and really be aware of their own learning. In your book, there's a list of 12 things, 12 characteristics of constructivist teaching. They all fit with these lists, this emphasis in what instruction should do. I wanted to include this list because I feel like it kind of gives you the broader picture of where we're trying to go, and then all of those 12 specific things can fit within that. So the first of the theorists that we're going to talk about is Piaget. And Piaget's framework for learning was that he was focused on answering the question, how does knowledge evolve? And I'm going to talk about Piaget from kind of the bigger perspective of his theory. Your book goes into a lot of detail, and I'll go into some detail on things that I think are really important, or things that I feel like your book kind of is lighter on how they describe it, and then there'll be other things that I refer you to your book because they do a great job. The view of learning that Piaget had, what he decided in that kind of quest to understand how learning happened, is that knowledge evolves, that learning evolves as we adapt to different aspects of reality. And we adapt to reality through a process that he called equilibration. So when we experience things in the environment that don't match what we know, we feel uncomfortable. We want to resolve the issue and bring ourselves back into equilibrium with the environment. This is why he used the term equilibration, because we go through this process of equilibration when we feel uncomfortable with the environment. Your book talks about both cognitive disequilibrium and about cognitive dissonance. Both of those terms are commonly used terms for this. Sometimes in science, we'll see people talk about using discrepant events to achieve this. These discrepant events are things that intentionally put students into disequilibrium so they'll be ready to learn. So they'll be ready to kind of question whether or not the world around them matches their understanding. And there are entire books full of discrepant events, but a lot of them are things where really it's kind of a demonstration or a hands-on activity that students do that doesn't turn out the way they expect it to, or doesn't proceed as expected, so that they'll have that sense of disequilibrium. The drive that we have to maintain equilibrium between our cognitive structures and environment causes us to go through one of two processes, either assimilation or accommodation. Those are the two things that we do to adapt to the reality around us. So assimilation is when the learner transforms the incoming information so it fits into their existing way of thinking. So we often use examples of children and animals for this because they're just so common. This comic's great. The teacher talks about zebras in Africa. The child sees that the zebra is similar to a horse. She knows about a horse. So what she actually learns, the way she deals with this striped horse, is she decides that the striped thing is actually a horse that just lives in tall grass. She accommodated the new information. I'm guessing that her teacher never said, this animal is a kind of horse. But because it matched her horse close enough, she just kind of modified the zebra to make it become a horse. My nephew has a fantastic example of this. He's about a year old, and he has a dog named Emma. He and Emma are really close. Emma's always with him. Emma is very protective. When he started to talk, Emma was one of his first words. And he immediately, though, not only began to talk to Emma and call her Emma, and he gets really excited about his Emma, but he calls every four-legged furry creature an Emma. So when he called my dogs Emma, we kind of thought, well, that makes sense. They're also dogs. When he called the cat Emma, we thought, well, that was cute. When he called the horses Emma, we knew that he really had decided Emma meant four-legged furry creature. He was assimilating everything four-legged and furry to be the same as his Emma, his dog. That's assimilation. Adults assimilate all the time. I think that it's more comfortable to use assimilation examples of children because a lot of times assimilation examples from adults are times when we have prejudices or things that we kind of are unwilling to change our mind about. We are completely willing to adapt whatever we see in the world around us to what we already believe. There are lots and lots of studies about that. One that I really love is a study where they gave kids a whole bunch of data, and it was around controversial issues. And the data was all real. It was kind of selected intentionally to allow you to definitely argue your own point, and they found that students just really didn't even see within the data the things that didn't match what they had come in thinking about the world. And so we definitely see that assimilation happens. It happens all the time. And it's something that we naturally have to be able to do because the energy of changing what we believe all the time would be too much, and so assimilating has a pretty natural and important role. The other option is accommodating, and this is where the learner actually adapts their existing thinking to fit the incoming information. So in accommodation, we're actually changing our own cognitive structure to match what we're learning. In this case, a learner often has a personal experience with something that allows them to understand the need for a change in their prior conception. And this is why hands-on experiences and interactive experiences are so valuable, because as we kind of see things right in front of us that we have a role in manipulating, it's much more convincing that we need to change that experience or change that thing, that definition, that structure that we have. I really find that that using the ideas of assimilation and accommodation has been really helpful to me as a teacher, because it allows me to think really intentionally about the experiences that I provide for my learners. It also helps me to really understand why it's important for me to know what their prior knowledge is, not just know that prior knowledge exists. Because knowing what the prior knowledge is helps me to understand when that prior knowledge isn't complete, what accommodation needs to happen. And that helps me to better target my learning experiences. So for example, with that child who, if we take the example of an early learner who is unable to really accommodate to have different types of mammals with four legs, I know that I need to provide them with experiences where they can see the different way that animals' feet are, not feet, what animals' feet are, the pads on the dog's foot versus um, the cow's hoof versus the horse's hoof versus the cat with its very sharp claws, to hear the different sounds the animals are making, to really kind of internalize this thing that each of these animals has many different things about them, even though they all have four legs and are furry. And allow that child to then really form their own new conception with a lot more information about what makes those animals unique. And with the more complex information as learners grow older, that becomes a much more difficult task to kind of target what they need to know, but being aware of those pieces of prior knowledge that they're bringing in, and also the common misconceptions, becomes really important. Piaget is very famous for his stages, and I'm not going to go into detail about each of the stages. Your book does a great job of that. What I do want to say is that Piaget's stages are one of the issues that come with his theory. Not because the stages are wrong, but because he didn't ever intend for us to hold students to these years. He did believe that you kind of couldn't accelerate learning very much beyond this, but that, each individual was an individual and could come in and out of these stages, or could move through the stages kind of at their own pace. But what's happened is many people kind of want to lockstep say between 2 and 7 years you shouldn't do these types of tasks because the learners aren't ready. And that isn't necessarily a helpful way to interpret Piaget's theories. So I do just want to say that there has been a lot of research done to show that that the types of learning activities that you do with individuals can accelerate them, that development and age does play a role, that the same activity for two different age learners will impact them differently, but that learners seem to be able to move through the stages differently based on the learning environment. And that there are some things that we kind of naturally will get as we get older, but we can maybe get those things younger based on the environment, things like logic. Everybody kind of eventually will reach a point of being logical, but we can't actually teach younger children to act with logic. So that's one thing that research has shown. The other thing is that we seem to be able to see that you can be moving through these stages and move from one stage to another for one subject area or one type of learning before the other. So for example, you may be able to really apply logic very, very well to social interactions, but really be struggling with applying logic to the representations of numbers and be struggling with math. So to say that somebody is definitely in, you know, the formal operational period for everything maybe isn't true. You might have people who move into that formal operational period for some things before they move for others. So the most important thing about the stages is as a teacher to be aware of the progression and to be aware of where most of your students are in that progression, and then to adapt your learning opportunities in ways that might be helpful to them where they are and to the ways in which they're progressing through the stages. And that's one of your questions for this week, is to think about, based on where you plan to teach, which stage are your students most likely in, and what does that mean for your instructional techniques? What types of things should you be doing? So the 4 stages you can see on the screen are sensory motor, which is generally birth to 2 years. So unless you're looking at really early childhood, you're not going to be looking at a sensory motor period. The pre-operational period is 2 to 7 years, which means that we really do still see the kids in like 4K and kindergarten and maybe into first grade, maybe a little bit depending on development into second grade. those early childhood grades are the pre-operational period. And that's where we start to see symbolic thought. We start to see students able to use things to represent other things. They're still very egocentric, very focused on themselves. Um, and you see this on the slide, this marked by irreversibility. Students are kind of able to follow one train of thought, and they struggle with kind of going backwards um, and modifying that thought. They kind of need to stick on their own path, or they get a little bit flustered. So again, remember that thing about some students are going to kind of move beyond that well before 7 years. Other students might still be in that place up to 9 years, especially when it comes to certain things. Maybe, like I said, things like math, where we're using a number to represent a quantity, that they may stay pre-operational a little bit longer with those abstract things. The concrete operational period would generally be upper elementary, where we're able to apply mental operations to concrete events. And that's where we do start to see students doing computational math, where they're hearing a story problem of a concrete event, doing the mathematics in their mind, and then able to give you a response. We also start to see this idea of mastery of conservation, that when there are 7 balls on the table and I put 7 balls into the glass, I know that there are still 7 balls in there, even though I can't see them anymore. I understand this idea. I can pour things from one cup to another. I still get that it's the same amount, even though it now looks different. And we're able to start to classify in hierarchical ways. The formal operational period begins basically when we go into middle school. And, part of the ways in which we've broken apart the school, it was influenced by Piaget. And this is where we have abstract ideas, logical, systematic thinking. So when we begin to do things like algebra, we begin to do things like talking about symbolism in a much more meaningful way in writing. And we're able to really deal with abstract in a more meaningful way. So your book goes into a lot more detail about each one. We could have had a slide for each one here, but this just gives you kind of a bigger overview of them. The other theorist that we are going to talk about is Vygotsky. And his framework really focused on the interaction of interpersonal or social, cultural, historical, and individual factors, and how that impacts human development. So you can already hear that Vygotsky and Piaget, it was really different, because Piaget said we just develop. Vygotsky says the world around us influences our development. And I think that we could summarize it to say that Piaget felt like our development caused the learning, and Vygotsky felt that the learning really caused the development. And it's kind of a chicken and an egg situation. I don't think that anybody really. I think that there still are people actively researching who are in both of those camps. So what's important for you to know about each of them, though, is that learning and development are incredibly linked. And that when it comes to learning, the interpersonal world, the things that we're interacting with culturally, historically, and with the people around us socially, is going to impact our learning. The hallmark of Vygotsky's view of learning is this idea that learning occurs when students work within their zone of proximal development. So you can see there's a little illustration of this here, and a quote from Vygotsky's writing himself. He said, "The distance between the actual development level, as determined by independent problem solving, and the level of potential development as determined through problem solving under guidance or in collaboration with more capable peers, is what the ZPD is." So when we're within this, where the learner can do it unaided, we're not going to be learning, because we already know those things. That's like asking a college student to do simple addition. We're not learning anything, because I can do that all by myself. There are going to be the things out here that I can't do no matter how much you help me. I'm not going to be taking it in. We often say that this is it's over my head. Going to that lecture, what they were saying was over my head. I couldn't take it in. And then you have this area right here. That's the sweet spot, where with the help of peers or collaboration, we'll talk in just a second about how Vygotsky defined that, I'm able to do something that I can't do alone. Okay, so you can see problem solving under adult guidance or in collaboration. So that you just, one thing is that if they can do it with our help, not us doing it for them, but asking them questions, giving them prompts, then that's within their zone of proximal development. They're learning from that interaction. If they can do it with another peer that is more capable, or even just a peer that knows what questions to ask, it's in their zone of proximal development. Vygotsky also, though, and it's not in this exact quote, but he defined tools and written interaction, tools and written words as interaction with more capable peers, because a more capable peer developed that thing, and as I interact with it, it's as if I'm interacting with that peer. It's obviously not exactly the same as if I were interacting with that peer, but I'm now able to do things that I couldn't do alone. So be really cautious about the misuse of this theory. It definitely is one of my huge pet peeves when I hear people talking about the ZPD incorrectly. I could give some examples of some programs that are used by schools, especially elementary schools, that misuse this idea of ZPD, some of them specifically reading programs, to understand that if you were going to give somebody something they can do alone, that they're not going to struggle with at all, that they don't need help with, it's not within their ZPD. What's in their ZPD are the things that they might need somebody to help them with, or they might need some sort of an assist with, because then they're learning from it. Things that are just practice that aren't a stretch aren't within the ZPD. Cognitive change only occurs when a student is working within their ZPD. Okay, that's really important. So while Piaget said cognitive change only occurs when I have disequilibrium, Vygotsky is saying cognitive change only occurs when I'm in my ZPD. These two ideas aren't in conflict with each other, though, because if I'm not in disequilibrium, it's kind of like being able to do it unaided. Having to do something with guidance is a little bit uncomfortable, and so it's kind of a different definition of that discomfort. But with both of these, what we're really saying is this is something that what I have within me, what I can do by myself, isn't enough, and I need help. Now I learn when I reach that point. One of the major implications of Vygotsky's work is scaffolding, and I really want to say a lot of times people imply or state that this is part of Vygotsky's theory. Your book is an example of that. They talk about scaffolding within Vygotsky's theory. They don't make it clear that this is not Vygotsky's theory. The term was first used in 1976 by Wood, Bruner, and Ross. It's often confused with the ZPD, but it is not the same thing. The ZPD is within the learner. Right? The ZPD is something within the learner that I as a learner can do this with help, but not alone. Scaffolding is something in the learning environment. It is designed specifically to keep the learner within their ZPD. Okay, so scaffolding is not within the learner, it's within the learning environment. Its design is to keep the learner within their ZPD. So the process, instructional scaffolding is the process of controlling parts of the learning task that are beyond the learner's capabilities. That's what instructional scaffolding is. What it does, it allows the learner to focus on and master the intended features of the task. And it's really important that instructional scaffolding fades as the learner is able to perform independently. It has to do that because once you reach the point where the learner can do it on their own, now their ZPD has shifted because that now no longer is part of their ZPD. If we never fade, then the learner never is able to perform it independently. They've become reliant on the scaffolding and they don't learn. Okay, so it's really important that we do scaffold so that learners can focus on what they need to be learning, but that we do remove the scaffolding at some point so that they're able to kind of complete that cycle and actually learn. So those are two theorists that are major theorists for constructivism. There are newer theorists that have influenced it. If you were doing an educational theory class or an ed psych class, it would be really important to talk about some of those newer theories. But for the purpose of understanding how constructivism impacts science, those two theorists really do form the basis. So I'd like you to do for your activity this week, I'm actually going to ask you to go online to the nationsreportcard.gov, which is part of the NAEP website, and NAEP is the National Assessment of Educational Progress. The NAEP assessment is used, a percentage of students in each state are tested. It's never released which schools are tested. Individual teachers would know whether or not their school was tested this year and potentially which students in their school were tested, but it's not a student level or even a school level accountability. It's just a test that allows us to compare between states to see if everybody's given the same test, what do their scores look like? Now, as we have these consortiums of states that are going to be doing a Common Core test, we will be able to make some comparisons between some states, but NAEP will continue to kind of be the standard. One thing that I love about these tasks, that I'm going to ask you to do one of, these are called interactive computer tasks, is that they provide a really great kind of comprehensive environment for an investigation that students would do. There's one at each of the grade levels, grade 4, grade 8, and grade 12, in physical science, earth science, and life science. Okay, so you can pick whichever one you want. You'll notice that mystery plants, planning a park, and phytoplankton factor are listed at 40 minutes. The rest are all listed at 20 minutes. I would say that I can do mystery plants in 20 minutes. These are the length of time it would take a 4th grade student to do it, or an 8th grade student. That was the amount of time they were given for the assessment. I'd like you to do one of these, and as you do it, you should be thinking about, how does this online activity incorporate constructivist principles? And the reason I'm giving you these to do is because, you know, your book gives you some opportunities to do some experiments, but because we don't have a face-to-face class environment, I can't really set it up to walk you through some constructivist environments. But these activities do provide students an opportunity to build their own and construct their own understanding. So take some time to do one of those. You'll reflect on that in your forum post questions. Speaking of which, there are 4 forum post questions this week. The first one is, your book lists 12 descriptors of constructivist teaching. You need to select 6 of these and explain, using material from this week's course material, why these are things constructivist teachers do or should do. And from what I mean by this week's course material is the reading, the presentation, and the video. So the reading being your chapter in your book, the presentation being this presentation, and then the video activity if there's something that you can pull out of the video on the teaching channel or the activity, you can pull those, but primarily you'll be referencing this presentation and the reading. So the reason I've allowed you to select 6 is that A, doing all 12 would be a lot, but also there may be 6 that speak to you more than others. My intent is really for you to internalize, for the 6 that you select, why these things are important and how they're supported by constructivist theory. The next thing that you'll do is, we could summarize that the general age ranges for Piaget stages would be pre-operational for early elementary, concrete operational for upper elementary, formal operational for middle school and beyond. So what are the 3 implications that you see for the grade level you intend to teach of Piaget stages? So if you're teaching early elementary, what are 3 things that are 3 implications of the pre-operational stage based on Piaget's theory? If you are looking at upper elementary, what are 3 implications of concrete operational? If you're looking at middle school and beyond, what are the 3 implications of formal operational? The next question is, what principles of social constructivism did you see in the video? Do you think that they're being used effectively? Why or why not? And then the last question is, how did the online activity incorporate constructivist principles? And do you think that was effective? Why or why not? I look forward to reading your posts, and I hope that you all have a great week.